So if you're over 50 and you've been told you have insulin resistance, prediabetes, or type 2 diabetes, researchers have actually been studying creatine in relation to all of these: glucose control, insulin resistance, and even muscle loss as we age. So today I'm going to combine what two major review papers have to say about this. One's from 2021, the other one is from 2025. I'll put the links downstairs in the description if you want to read them yourself. But the main takeaway is this: creatine by itself isn't the big draw, but creatine plus exercise, aerobic, and resistance training, that combination might seriously be meaningful. And this is what you need to understand and why the strength training component is such a big deal. Your skeletal muscle is like a big giant sponge for sugar. And seriously, form this picture in your mind. After you eat, a big chunk of your blood sugar is supposed to move into your muscle cells. And that's one reason that muscle is so protective as we get older. More muscle means more storage space for glucose. And I want to make this really clear. Insulin resistance, prediabetes, and type 2 diabetes, all of those are scenarios where excess glucose floating around in your bloodstream is either higher or becoming pathologically higher than it needs to be. So to reverse those conditions, it's important to shift the body in a direction that remedies those problems, because high glucose persistently floating around in the bloodstream leads to dehydration, to cardiovascular disease, nerve damage, kidney damage, damage to the eyes, poor wound healing. That's why you see so many diabetics who have lost limbs due to amputation. And that's where this 2025 review really leans in. It talks about type 2 diabetes and sarcopenia being connected. Sarcopenia is age-related muscle loss. So if you lose muscle, you have less room to store glucose. Blood sugar runs higher. Insulin resistance gets worse. And then insulin resistance makes it harder to maintain muscle. And then it becomes this nasty loop that just spirals if it's not addressed. So the question becomes, can tools such as supplements that support muscle also support glucose control in the process? Exercise is the obvious biggest tool, which can lower blood sugar in two ways. One way is insulin dependent, meaning insulin helps open the door to the muscle cells. The other way is insulin independent, meaning muscle contraction opens the door even if insulin isn't working well. And this is huge for people with insulin resistance. Now, let's talk about the door. The main doorway that lets glucose into the muscle cells to begin with is a transporter called GLUT4, G-L-U-T4. And you can think of GLUT4 like a set of doors on the muscle cell. And when GLUT4 moves to the cell surface, glucose can get in. When it doesn't move there, glucose stays in the bloodstream. And both papers talk about this same idea. Creatine may help glucose control by improving GLUT4 activity, especially when it's paired with exercise. Now, what about creatine by itself? Well, the 2021 review walks through a bunch of animal studies and some human studies. In animal studies, creatine sometimes looks helpful for glucose tolerance or insulin sensitivity, but animal studies can be all over the place. Different species, different dosing, different exercise model. So it's really hard to directly apply that to human life. When you look at human trials where creatine is taken without exercise, the results are mixed as well, and often underwhelming in regard to blood sugar. Some studies show changes in glycogen storage, some show no change in glucose or insulin response at all. So if someone is hoping creatine alone will fix insulin resistance, that's not what these reviews support. But here's where it does get interesting. Creatine plus exercise. Both papers keep coming back to the same idea. Creatine seems to work best as an add-on to training, not a replacement for training. And the strongest piece of evidence they keep pointing to is a clinical trial in people with type 2 diabetes. It was randomized, double-blind, and placebo-controlled. Creatine was combined with an exercise program, and the creatine group actually improved glucose control. The authors also pointed to that mechanism of more GLUT4 being recruited to the muscle cell surface. So again, more doors open, more sugar goes into the muscle, less stays in the bloodstream. So what does this mean for real human beings? If you're 55, 65, 75 or above, and you're worried about blood sugar, or your doctor has told you that you're pre-diabetic or that you have type 2 diabetes, well, the most powerful supplement you can take is still physical movement. exercise. Walking helps, but resistance training is especially important because it helps preserve the muscle that protects us, the muscle that acts to tuck away and store excess blood glucose from the diet. And the 2025 review highlights this. When we combine aerobic exercise and resistance training, strength training, we often see better improvements in glucose markers like A1C, as opposed to either aerobic exercise or strength training by themselves. So in the big picture, exercise is the foundation and the most important tool in the toolbox. But creatine may be one of the best studied add-ons to support that foundation. Now the question everybody asks next is, okay, but is creatine safe for diabetics? And also, what about the kidneys? Well, both reviews describe creatine monohydrate as generally well tolerated at the recommended doses. And there are also studies specifically looking at kidney function in type 2 diabetics taking creatine, showing no impairment in a controlled setting. Now, that matters because fear around creatine in kidneys is one of the biggest myths that keeps older adults away from it. And this is where a lot of doctors need to get really clear on the research, because creatine isn't likely going away. And the vast majority of research that's been done in regard to creatine in the kidneys does not implicate creatine as a danger to the kidneys at the typical 3 to 5 gram doses that are most studied. Now, big disclaimer, if you already have kidney disease or you're on complex medications, you're dealing with dehydration, or if you have a doctor telling you to avoid creatine, those are different conversations altogether. But for the typical healthy person with stable labs, no known kidney disease, these papers describe creatine monohydrate as having a strong safety record at standard dosing. So where do we land with all this? Well, here's the clean takeaway if you're insulin resistant or have pre or type 2 diabetes. Creatine is not a replacement for exercise, it's not a replacement for great nutrition, and they're not a replacement for diabetic medications if they're needed. But creatine may support the very thing that protects your blood sugar the most as we age, our skeletal muscle. When creatine is paired with exercise, and specifically the combination of aerobic exercise and strength training, the evidence appears pretty promising by optimizing glucose transport into the muscle, especially through GLUT4 activity. Both papers agree we still need bigger, longer trials. No one's calling this a proven anti-diabetic supplement, but in the right person, doing all the right things with their doctor in the loop, creatine might turn out to be an adjunct to other medical approaches to optimize glucose control in people fighting insulin resistance or pre and type 2 diabetes in the future. If you haven't watched this video about the benefits of weight training as we age, you can watch it next. As always, thanks for watching, and please share this video with someone you feel would benefit from watching it as well. Stay strong, don't give up, and I will see you in the next video.